Are you going to go down the smoking route with your barbecue, Ed?
You know that. It turns out that the one of the best suppliers of smoking woods in the UK is 6 miles away from my parents. So I'm going to send my poor 65-year-old mother off to buy a 40-kilo box of wood.
You are a...
Yes. That's Mr. to you.
Turbo.
Turbo. Yeah.
And there's the beginning for the podcast. Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 25th of June 2014. I'm Phil Hinton and joining me tonight is Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
All I'm saying is there's a reason why Sporty Spice is the only one who ain't got a fella.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
I know, it put me off beans on toast for life.
Movies Editor Simon Crust.
Get your lesbian feet out of my shoes.
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
I didn't ask to be good at football. Guru Nanak must have blessed me.
Welcome along to the podcast. And sadly, we've got no Ask the Idiot question tonight, or questions. Obviously,
probably just as well, actually.
Probably,
after last week.
And it's warm and sunny, seemingly, outside. Not that I've looked out the window. So anybody with half a brain is obviously going to be outside with no interest in what a bunch of nerds sitting indoors has got to say about anything. So we're going to kick off the hardware news with the time of recording this afternoon. We broke this story. And by the time you listen to this on Wednesday or after that, it's going to be pretty old news. But Dolby Atmos has been announced by Onkyo, Pioneer, Denon and others as being on their new models of AVRs come the autumn. And it'll also be available on Blu-ray disc. What do you think of this news, Steve?
Expected, to be honest. There was always, at some point, Dolby were going to look at a way of putting Atmos into the home. I thought it might wait a bit longer, just to give the chance for there actually to be some cinemas in the UK with Dolby Atmos to start with. But I'm assuming that the manufacturers, the AVR receiver manufacturers, they need something to sell more product, and another badge on the front will do it. How it's being implemented is interesting. There's talk of 2 ways, basically. One is actually having overhead speakers, up to 4. And the other one they're talking about is having special Dolby Atmos speakers which have upwards firing drivers in the tops of the speakers, I'm assuming, which is interesting because I've just reviewed an all-in-one system by LG, the BH950, which has exactly that. It's got 4 tall boy speakers, one for each left front and right, and rear left and right, and they've got upward firing drivers to create a sort of a 3D height experience to the audio. So it's not exactly new. It's been done by lots of people before. I'm guessing the interesting thing will be how Atmos is implemented in terms of processing, how much channels amplification are necessary, and how it's being delivered via Blu-ray. They're talking about delivering it via Blu-ray. I'm not quite sure how it's going to be done. Was it by metadata or what? But that's the bits that are interesting me at the moment, the detail.
Yeah, another interesting comment by a forum member was that with this announcement, come Christmas, there'll be more Dolby Atmos equipped home cinemas than there will be auditoriums.
Well, if there's like 3 or 4, we'll have that number covered, won't we? So what's interesting to me is, and I don't know, have you experienced Atmos, Phil?
I haven't, no, just Toro.
Well, having done both in very, in full-on cinema installations, I tend to side with Wilfred on this one, the guy that developed Auro 3D. Sorry, he talks about height as opposed to overhead, but a height level as being far more important than just having an overhead voice of God speaker. And I tend to agree with him on that one. I think that the way your ears have evolved, you're more attuned to noises of just above ear level, as opposed to being directly above your head. And Atmos is very much about sound directly above your head. Now, I can't think of too many instances where having sound directly above my head is going to be a major improvement in the audio quality. I understand.
The odd flyover.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas additional height to make it a more immersive experience, that kind of makes sense to me. So it'll be interesting. What I'm interested in seeing is how Auro 3D respond to this in terms of whether they're going to get into bed with obviously they've got some high-end implementations for people like DataSat, but whether they're going to get involved with some.
Well, can they get involved? Because, like you say, they're involved with DataSat. They have their own company, which is Storm Audio, their own section doing their own thing. I have no doubt that they have signed licensing agreements with DataSat. So you've got to wonder whether they're going to go from the really high end down to the level that we're talking about here, which is Onkyo, Denon and Pioneer. So you're talking about AV receivers from about 800 quid upwards. So
well, it's theoretical. I mean, long as and they're still going. I mean, the interesting thing I think is that the kind of places where you're going to have 4 overhead speakers or additional height speakers like this is going to tend to be pro installations as opposed to someone's front room. I just can't see most people convincing the wife to let them put 4 speakers over their head. On that basis alone, it's going to be more high-end installations, which suggests that maybe Auro 3D's approach is correct in the sense that they're going for the high-end market where people are going to do this. Whereas I don't think. I mean, you might have Atmos on a £1,000 AVR, but I think most people are going to struggle to have a 9.1.4 system in their home.
In the US, you get a number of people using ceiling speakers for AV systems, but that is exclusively ceiling speakers for AV systems. There's 5.1 with them all in the ceiling, and it sounds at least as bizarre as you can imagine. I'm sure that we will read about, and I will enjoy reading about a forum member that gets it up and running in a domestic situation. But the very idea of trying to plumb 4 ceiling speakers in addition to the ones that are already there, I don't. I'm pleased that we've got a genuine new feature for AV receivers to offer the general public. I just can't see it being the sort of thing that has people going, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to take the old stuff to the tip and get straight down to my dealer or online purveyor of audio and update to this. I'm pleased that we're making progress. It's the same jaded cynicism I get with a number of these things. AV receivers are losing market share because they're complicated and they require you to put lots of speakers in the room. So the solution is that the next generation of AV receivers are going to be more complicated and invite you to put more speakers into the room. Yay.
I was going to say that was one of the things I liked about Auro 3D's approach was the idea of adding height speakers above the front left and right and rear left and right speakers. So in effect, you're not really taking up additional space in terms of adding speakers. I mean, if you had a 7.1 system, you're adding 2 speakers at the rear, suddenly you're taking up the rear wall, which might be inconvenient for people. Having a speaker in the ceiling, definitely going to be inconvenient. But adding a speaker above an existing speaker kind of makes sense in terms of adding a height channel and more impact and more immersion with the minimum amount of disturbance in terms of the viewing environment.
No.
So
in a living room, you ain't going to get that past the wife. No, ain't going to happen. Is it,
hey,
Simon?
My wife is almost completely irrelevant in this. I just, I've got people, threatening to, I say threatening. I have invited them to build a conservatory on the back of the house. The conservatory, the kitchen is going to be done later on in the summer. Just the idea of more tradesmen do it, and I know technically you could probably do it if you were proficient at DIY, but I'm not. I mean, DIY is just a misspelling of do yourself an injury, as far as I'm concerned. So it's just more effort, and unless there is a very strong launch set of Atmos Blu-rays as well, which again strikes me as a bit of an if moment, it's a lot of effort to go for an indeterminate library of material.
We're talking about the wife acceptance factor or the partner factor. Ceiling speakers or speakers up high. Personally, I think anybody that's in a loving relationship and using the living room as an AV room as well, there's no way they're going to get that past the other half.
I don't think so. Personally speaking, I'm not sure I'd want to do it to my own lounge. Really, I wouldn't want to put more speakers on the ceiling. If I had a dedicated room, that's a different matter. But a lounge room, that's not what they're for.
Simon,
you're in.
We want to sell you more stuff, mate. That's all, what this is all about.
Yeah.
It's another badge to go in the front of an Onkyo AV receiver, which
they haven't got enough badges on the front of those things already.
They're probably going to have to make it an inch wider just so they can get the extra badges in.
I tell you what has occurred to me, right? I wonder how long it is before someone gets killed by a falling speaker, and then somebody sues Onkyo or Denon or Atmos. It's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, you've got to make sure those things are up there really securely, because a speaker's pretty heavy.
Yeah,
and it lands on your head.
It sounds like it's coming straight for me.
Yeah, just a little bit too realistic to sound it. Mark, is this something that floats your boat as a gamer? I mean, is it something that the games industry is even interested in?
I very much doubt it. I think sound design in games is still in its infancy, put it that way. good 2-channel would be good enough for me at the moment.
There are Auro 3D games, actually, aren't there, Phil?
Yes, there is. Yeah,
there is. Yeah, I don't know about Atmos, but certainly there are Auro 3D games that are mixed in Auro 3D. So,
this is another thing, and I've been trying to keep out of this conversation. I know you've given the Auro side, Steve, and I didn't really want to go one way or the other. But what I will say is, the Auro solution, it has the up mixer as well, which we haven't heard anything about Dolby having an up mixer. So I remember sitting and listening to that mono track with the up mixer and being blown away. We don't know if Atmos can do that kind of thing yet either.
No. Like we said, it only broke today, and we're still thin on details. But there's a lot. I mean, I've heard both, and both in certain circumstances can be very impressive. But I just think I can buy into the concept of height channels more than I can buy into the concept of having 4 overhead speakers. I think that's going to limit, because you aren't designed to hear sounds directly above you. That's not the way hearing works. So I'm less convinced of the benefits of doing that, and it's definitely going to be harder to install. Basically.
Yeah, like Wilfred explained, and again, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just putting over the information that we have is up to 60 degrees, the human hearing at the side. So up to about 60 degrees. Anything above that is more or less what he said, useless unless it's a flyover effect. Certainly useless for music, because you have no reflections that come from above, and if they do come from above, then they cause distractions more than anything else. So again, he's talking science. We haven't heard the science from Dolby yet, so we need to give them a chance to tell us exactly how the system's going to work and how the decoding's done, and if it has any neat up mixer and that kind of thing. But it's interesting news. Whether people are going to add extra speakers and stuff, I guess our crowd, AV enthusiasts, might be tempted if they have a dedicated room. I think it suits more the custom installers. Somebody mentioned custom install before. I think it might have been Ed. That's definitely the market that it's aimed at. If you're starting with a blank piece of paper, there's nothing stopping you putting the extra speakers in the room and so on. So I think that's maybe where the market is going to be for that. And like you said, Steve,
you're right. It's interesting. I mean, I'm switching over to the little ellipson planets, the Planet M's, and they actually have a ceiling mount. So, I mean, if I take leave of my senses and have a heavy blow to the head, I can actually add 4 of them, and they actually, it looks a bit weird. They end up in these little sort of recessed sort of eyeball sockets sticking out of the ceilings. But yeah, in theory, I've gone for 5 of them. Why? Let's go all in. How many weird little balls can I fit in my lamp?
I definitely think the custom install side of things, that's where you sell it. That's where it's going to get sold, because it can be hidden away in the design. It can be hidden behind plaster or material or whatever, so you don't even know the speakers are there. And I think that's the ideal market. Not, I don't think the AV enthusiast, unless they've got a dedicated room.
The thing about Dolby Atmos, it's not just about height channels. The thing about Atmos in the cinema is it has the 2 arrays of speakers going over your head. But it also has side speakers going right up to the front of the screen itself. That's part of the idea. This is to get this smooth transition of pans from front to rear with no gaps at all. And it also means that they can then, in terms of the objects within the sound mix, they can move them around this 360-degree space with ease. Now, looking at their home version, the way it's implemented in the home, there isn't any of that kind of speakers going from the front all the way down the side wall. Basically, it's got either a classic 5.1 or 7.1 setup with additional height, overhead speakers, and there is also one what they call 9.1.4, which is front, left, and left and right and center, and then I guess speakers slightly ahead of you, slightly in front of you, and then to side and to the rear.
Looks like width channels.
Yes, basically the width channels, effectively. So I suppose that does replicate, it was meant to replicate to a degree, that sense of having speakers that run all the way down the sidewall in a cinema. So it'd be interesting. I mean, it would be interesting to do a comparison between a cinema experience and the way it's implemented in the home.
And can you do that? Are you going to have the speakers to do that? You guys?
Maybe. I can't
put it this way. Speakers. Put it this way. Steve hasn't got anybody to object.
Yeah, but I might well become the first person to be killed by a speaker when it falls on my head with my DIY skills.
Anyway, it's interesting stuff. Like we say, it's only broken today, the news, and we still haven't had any of the real technical ins and outs. So once we have that, we'll probably either discuss that next week or when the podcast comes back after the summer holidays. Just to quickly wrap up, Steve, you've been looking at a couple of things. I think the main thing we need to talk about here is webOS. Had a name change to Smart Plus, but you've had the first LG TV through the LB730. The review will be up on the site by the time the podcast goes up. Smart Plus, you gave it a reference badge. Again, the review will be up soon. And I kind of see why you did that, having played about with the system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. After using it, it's one of those systems that, because it's so well designed in terms of the way you interact with it, it's very, very intuitive. It's totally, seamless. It's part of the TV. It's not something that's added on. It's so after using it for a couple of days, I was just zipping through stuff, and going back to another TV that had a more traditional smart platform, it was like the Stone Age. It was just incredible how quickly I became used to this completely different approach to implementing smart TV on a TV itself. The thing about webOS, as it's now called Smart Plus, which I've got to say I prefer webOS as a name, but anyway, is that it is effectively, it's not a system that's added onto the TV. The smart platform is the TV, and then everything else is within that platform. So everything, be it an HDMI input or Netflix or attached device, they are all treated as apps. So on the bottom scroll bar, you'll see Netflix and Amazon Prime and HDMI 1 and HDMI 2, and you just click on it and it takes you straight to it. And it's as simple as that. And you've got, when you hit the home button, there's the scroll bar on the bottom, and if you go backwards, in other words, to the left, you go back through things you opened previously. And if you go forwards to the right, then you've got other things you can open as well. But again, totally intuitive. It's like backwards and forwards in time. It's very responsive. It's very fast, and you don't have to come out of one thing to go into another thing. If you're in Netflix, you just hit Amazon Prime, it takes you into Amazon Prime. I'm not saying it's instantaneous, because obviously it needs to log into Amazon Prime, but in the sense that if it's ease of use, it's just incredibly intuitive and simple. It looks very slick. It's well designed, and it's I really do believe this is a game changer in terms of the way that smart platforms are implemented within television.
I've got to say, I played about with it on the 84-inch 4K TV, and it was super fast on that TV. Obviously, it's got the extra processing built in, but that was going from a 4K Netflix stream to another application, and it was almost it was as quick as changing a channel on a normal TV. It was that quick.
Well, but that may be because they were already logged in, I suppose.
Obviously, once you're logged in, you don't need to log in again,
because it will log you out again.
Yeah.
But, obviously, I got to stress, the TV I had was not one of their flagship models. It was kind of a mid-range. So again, yes, you're right. The higher models will have more processing power and will be even faster. But even on this, it was just big. Also, you've got the Magic Motion remote, so it's all just you're just pointing at things and pressing. So fast, so intuitive, so simple that once I picked up an ordinary remote control and went through a normal smart platform, it just felt like a Stone Age in comparison.
Okay, was the TV any good?
Yeah, the TV was pretty good actually. Which I'll be honest and say last year. LG had a few problems in terms of their picture quality, I think. For example, things like the CMS didn't work properly. Black levels were very poor. There were, a lot of banding and things like this. And they maybe some other aspects of the TVs were good, but certainly the pure picture quality terms, I don't think they were great. I've got to say that the TV I had, which was the LB730, was very good. Very nice, very, very nice picture. Black levels, not as good as some of the competition who use VA panels, but still very good. The local dimming was excellent. Lovely natural image, nice and accurate. CMS still didn't work properly, but given that the out-of-the-box color accuracy was very, very good, it wasn't really much of an issue. A little bit of banding on the football when the camera was panning backwards and forwards, but other than that, I thought it was a really good picture. I was quite impressed.
Okay, and that wraps up hardware. We'll be back in a second with some games news. We're back with some games news. PlayStation Now markets in beta in the US, but there has been some information in terms of the likely cost, and it seems to be quite high.
Yes, it seems very much like it may end up being dearer than expected. Very much still in the phase where Sony are testing prices, and so there's obviously room for some slight tinkering, but you can see the various rental periods that they've set out and what the kind of price rise increments are going to be. So something like Final Fantasy 13-2, you can rent it for 4 hours for $4.99. For 7 days,
what?
For 4 hours.
You rent it to play for 4 hours?
Yeah.
I'll be up to one level through it by then.
You're getting into it's cheaper to have, crack whores. Sorry, just putting it out there.
Well, particularly for a game that's going to have cinematics in it. If you're looking at something like a Final Fantasy title or say something like a Metal Gear Solid title, then half that time could be spent just watching a cutscene. But it goes up to 7 days for $7.99, 30 days for $14.99, or 90 days for $29.99, which is more than the game would cost itself. It's interesting in as much as a lot of people assumed that Sony had bought Gaikai and this idea of game streaming, that it would almost be a kind of a tester for people to go on to enjoy Sony consoles, and then they would buy a PS4 or something. As it is, this seems a kind of weird in between model where it almost looks slightly punitive, the charges, so almost to kind of force people to say, well, pony up and buy a proper console or something, or it's there for this idea in the future that it might come to Bravia smart TVs and possibly other mobile devices. So it's a nice easy way to get towards premium content, stuff like PS3 games. But we're close to the planned US release, which I think was end of July for the US. So it certainly seems a lot dearer than a lot of people expected. I think people assumed that it would be kind of maybe somewhere around $10 or something, and then you'd get a premium title for a fortnight or something like that, or maybe even a little bit longer. As it is, with a few game rental places still about, it doesn't look like it's really going to fit into the market. I just can't see exactly where they plan to find people who will sign up for this.
I'm not just laying the groundwork for a future model where it's your only option. Well, your only option, but there won't be anywhere else you can rent, and if you have to buy downloading either the game or renting it becomes an economic viability.
Yeah, I think that the plan is hopefully that this is where backwards compatibility will be. I mean, we've gone past the stage of simply backwards compatible from a hardware perspective, because you're essentially trying to emulate a game is hard enough. So as with the PS3, the early models of the PS3, where they just included the chipset from the PlayStation 2 in there, so you've basically just stuck a smaller console inside a larger console. And that's no longer really viable. So hopefully this means that you will have content that will always be available. The question, though, is in the long run, if the idea is that this is for backwards compatibility, what happens with games that say you've bought this generation that you want to take with you? Will you get a code with you that says you're allowed to have access to this rentable title, to own that title, or will it simply be a case of, well, you've got to buy it again, as the current model is?
I'm sure they'll choose the least customer-friendly option possible. That if there's a lesson that we can draw from big companies trying to sell and rent things online, it's a learning curve, and they start right at the bottom and choose the most difficult one that they can possibly envisage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people are seeing with this pricing. But if they go down that route, it will be kind of an easy opportunity missed to introduce. Certainly, if they manage to get it in almost like an app form to translate it to mobile devices, Sony mobile devices, and perhaps other mobile devices or other smart TVs, it's a really easy way to kind of introduce people towards the idea of game streaming and what premium game content is like. In comparison, the golfing quality between, say, streaming something like The Last of Us or the average game that's available on a mobile platform is just absolutely night and day. If you can kind of tap into 2% of that mobile gaming market, you will be making huge amounts of money. And also, in a certain sense, Sony have kind of almost cut off the market themselves, because with things like PlayStation Plus and the Instant Game Collection, anyone who's got a console that these first things will be streamable on will already have access to cheaper quality games And so therefore, why are they going to go out and buy these? Why are they going to start streaming something from the last generation when they've probably played it anyway? If you're looking at a new market, then it has to be priced accordingly. But if someone's already got the console, they've likely played most of the things they want to anyway. So unless it's cheap enough, why is someone on, say, a PlayStation 4 going back to a PS3 title when it's costing them, the more than a PS4 title might do?
Yeah, it's definitely aimed at a completely new generation of gamers, isn't it? I mean, as Ed said, if they can tap into the mobile market, maybe give them a first taste for free and then screw them over over a period of time, that could be a massive generator of revenue for them.
Yeah, and if they get it certainly on the smart TVs and that kind of thing, then obviously that opens up huge doors for them. But at the moment, at the pricing that's shown, if they stick with that, it could be quite a niche service, which would be a shame because they spent a lot of money to get this game streaming company.
Yeah, it's Sony. They'll subsidise it.
Yeah, I think the PS4 is getting sold pretty much kind of at cost, or they're making a small profit as soon as you've bought anything. So they're not subsidising that much, not as much as in the days of the PS3. And that's games news.
What are you doing, movie-wise?
I'll do all 4 and 5 minutes.
4 and 5.
Oh, hang on, whether I've got my Casio data bank. Right. As soon as Steve starts, then I'll start it.
Okay, and this is on what is it you've got?
Casio data bank, and
right.
It's gold as well.
Okay, well, fantastic. Okay, right. So, what's at the cinema, Steve?
Well, it's one of those multiple bus weekends, so we've got 4 movies coming out in the same weekend. First of which is 3 Days to Kill. This is written by Luc Besson, directed by the ludicrously monikered McG, and starring Kevin Costner. Clearly, this was written for Liam Neeson, who presumably thought it was just too ridiculous even for him to do. And in it, Costner plays an aging CIA killer who's got terminal cancer and gets retired out of the CIA, goes back to his family who are in Paris for some strange reason. But obviously, it's written by Luc Besson, so set in Paris. And he tries to, sort of reconnect with his daughter and his ex-wife, but then discovers that the CIA aren't quite finished with him yet. They send over another operative who says she's got an experimental cure, and if he kills a certain number of people for her, she'll give him the cure and cure him of cancer. It's as ridiculous as it sounds. It's got some enjoyable action set pieces in it, but ultimately it's that kind of strange Luc Besson. He knocks these out every year now, and there's a kind of combination of a bit of comedy and a bit of action, and it doesn't really work. It's a bit too Gallic for my taste. McGee's not a good director. Costner's kind of sleepwalking his way through the role. Not a great film. I think Kaz's review's already up. He's probably a little bit generous on it. I think he gave it 7, but I'd say it's probably a 5 out of 10, really. It's mediocre at best. And as I said, it looked like one of those films had been written for Liam Neeson, and even he thought it was ridiculous, so didn't do it.
Time check.
1 minute 20.
On you go.
Oh, right, better go. Belle. This film is the first British movie that was shot entirely in 4K on Sony's F65 cameras. It's about it's a true story about a young girl who is the illegitimate mixed race daughter of an admiral, a Royal Navy admiral. He brings her home to his uncle, who's an earl, and she was raised, as one of the family. And it's one of those. I thought it was a really, really good film because it raises some interesting issues, not just about race, but also about the structure of society at the time in 18th century England, in terms of both the class structure and also gender structure. Because it makes an interesting parallel between people who were literally slaves and also people, women who, if they had no income of their own, were dependent on marrying a wealthy man and being utterly dependent upon them. And interestingly, in the film, Belle, Dido, who's the young girl who's mixed race, her father dies and leaves her a pension of £1,000 a year. So she's independently wealthy, whilst her cousin isn't, and her father's disowned her, and she has to find a husband. And it raises up lots of interesting issues about slavery. There's a court case going on in the background about the Zon, which was a true story about this ship where they killed all the slaves on board because they weren't worth anything, and then tried to claim on the insurance. So it's about abolition. It deals with sexism, with racism, with slavery, but also it builds into that kind of Jane Austen style romance. I thought it was a great movie. It looked gorgeous. The cast is superb. It's got like Tom Wilkinson, Miranda Richardson, Emily Watson. Really, the girl that plays Dido, Belle, she's excellent as well. It's really, really well acted, well written, well made film, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'd say that was a good 8 out of 10.
Time check.
Just gone through 3 minutes.
Then we've got The Fault in Our Stars. This is, I must admit, I was the only bloke in the cinema on this one, and I was the oldest by about 30 years. But a really good film. It's clearly aimed at a teen audience. It's about two teenagers, both of whom have got cancer. They meet and fall in love. It's a full old school repeat, and I'm a big enough man to admit I blood my eyes out at the end of this. It's funny in places. The cast are really likable. You like the characters. It doesn't shy away from the realities of the fact that these are children with cancer and they are most likely going to die. I'm not saying it's laugh a minute, but it is still enjoyable in a sense. But yeah, it doesn't shy away from the realities of this case. And
what
at the end
have
of
you
it,
done with the real Withers?
It's heartbreaking at the end, and I did quite enjoy it. Again, 8 out of 10. And then I saw Jersey Boys, which is Clint Eastwood's film version of the stage musical. This was a bit of a strange one because clearly Clint Eastwood was much more interested in the history of the Jersey Boys in terms of the band, the Four Seasons. They grew up in a rough part of New Jersey, and they were tied into the mob. And he's obviously interested in that part. So there's a lot of like swearing. It's got a really foul-mouthed screenplay, but which doesn't really tie in with the idea of them just singing their nice doo-wop songs. He seems more interested in the realities of the mob connections than he is about their musical career. And so the music kind of gets sidelined. And I don't think that's how... I haven't seen the stage play, but I suspect that the musical is a lot more about the music. Right at the very end of the film, they have a bit where they all sing and dance down the street with lots of, a medley of hits, medley of four-season hits. That seemed more like I suspect the
10,
musical is.
9,
and so people
8,
who like the musical
7,
probably won't like the film.
6,
Bit of a mixed bag. Give it 6 out of 10.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well done, Mr. Withers.
Ish.
I didn't get the score at the end.
I give it 6 out. I said I'd give it 6 out of 10.
Yeah, but I couldn't hear you because somebody was doing a
Well,
countdown.
because someone was talking over me.
Okay, Simon, Blu-ray is released next week.
Very, very slim pickings. We've got a Dyer film, Ride Along, which is an action comedy with Ice Cube
Kevin
in it.
Hart and Ice Cube.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I know it's going to be terrible.
I've seen it and it's bollocks.
Yeah, well, there you go. I knew someone had seen it. I knew it was going to be terrible. Anything with him in it is just awful. And the other one released is Non-Stop, which is Liam Neeson still riding the coattails of Taken, I think.
It's just Taken on a plane, isn't it?
Not a particularly good film.
Well, not like he Taken on a plane, but it is like it is. He's washed up, detecting. Was it a flight air marshal? That's right. He's an air marshal on a plane. The setup's quite interesting, but it doesn't carry it through to the end. It's not too bad. It's an enjoyable hour and a half of hokum, but don't expect anything too deep. But it's okay. It does what it says on the tin, frankly.
And are we interested at all in any of these that are coming out? Would you recommend them to anybody?
I wouldn't touch Ride Along with a barge pole, but I'd probably give Non-Stop a viewing.
No, would that be
it'd be an okay rental, wouldn't it?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah. would that be a rental, or would it be a stream?
You see, good question. No, I would buy it and sell it.
Okay. And Steve, would you stream this? I'm sure it would pop up on Sky. If it's out on disc, it'll pop up on the Sky and Now TV.
If I hadn't seen Non-Stop already at the cinema, I probably would watch it on Netflix or wherever it popped up and just on a board. Like, for example, I didn't get a chance to see The Family, which is another Luc Besson's last film, at the cinema, and that turned up on Netflix, so I watched that quite recently. And it was okay, but I certainly wouldn't blow 20 quid on it.
Had to mention the N-word.
It's inevitable, really.
Right,
it's only
so
a matter of time.
We haven't even seen episode 7 yet. Are we bothered about who's going to helm episode 8? I mean, did we think?
I think it's interesting that they're picking that Disney / Lucasfilm are trying to get in interesting, talented people to work on these films, not just hacks. So the fact that Rian Johnson, who made Looper and Brick and the Brothers Bloom, who I think is a very talented writer-director, is going to be writing and directing Star Wars Episode VIII and also being involved in the writing of Episode 9. So presumably J.J. Abrams, who's co-written and is directing Episode 7, will also be partly involved in writing of Episode 8 along with Rian Johnson and presumably Lawrence Kasdan. They've also got Gareth Edwards, who recently made Godzilla, who's going to be directing one of the standalone Star Wars films. Again, an interesting choice. I think that bodes well for the future. I mean, so far, everything that I've seen and heard from Lucasfilm or Disney about these films and the people that have been involved in them have all been top quality individuals, who you think, well, so far I haven't heard anything that's made me think, oh, Crust is going to be like the prequels.
Has there been much information on these standalones? I do find them intriguing. Are they time period consistent with this?
Yes, they will be. They will be set in the same time period. Well, certainly within the time period of the film. So anywhere between the prequels, start of the prequels, and these ones that they're doing now, somewhere within those time period. But they'll be concentrating on something else. So, for example, there are rumours one of them will concentrate on Boba Fett, which doesn't really help because he still gets swallowed by a giant vagina in the sand in Return of the Jedi. So, at the end of the day, what can you do with him? But that's the concept. I think
He escaped from the giant vagina. In the
well,
sand.
even after it belched. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that there's a huge universe here that they can play in. And if you look at what Marvel have been doing, obviously they've got a whole wealth of material to choose from in terms of Marvel universe over the last 60 odd years, which is fine. And Star Wars universe isn't quite as broad as that, but there's plenty of room for potential to do that. It's good. I mean, I'm excited. Unfortunately, Harrison Ford broke his leg 2 weeks ago when the door of the Millennium Falcon lands on him, so he's out of action for 8 weeks. But other than that, so far, touch wood, it looks okay.
One of the standalones for me would have to be get Dennis Lawson back in and do Wedge.
Do a Wedge movie.
Old Wedge the movie. That'd be brilliant. Do it like a road film or something, just to really subvert expectations.
Am I the only one that finds it surprising, though, that JJ's away after 7, after doing just one movie?
That's because of the time schedule, Phil. They've only got 2 years. The episode 7 comes out next year, and episode 8 comes out 2 years after that. There's no way he could write and direct one straight. He couldn't. He'd be still just be finished. They'll be going into pre-production on this before he's even finished shooting, doing finished post-production on the next one. So there's no way he can do it. But I think having different guys directing them is good too. I mean, the original trilogy went Lucas Kirshner and Mark Marquand. So why not have different directors doing different episodes?
I just assumed that because he'd done both the Star Treks that he was signed in to do the 3 Star Wars movies. I just assumed that was the case.
He could come back and do the 9th one.
I'm sure lots of people assumed that was the case until this was announced last week.
Any word on Chewbacca or the Ewoks?
Chewbacca's in it, definitely.
Oh, good.
Peter Mayhew is playing Chewbacca as well, so that's all good.
I didn't know if they could write Harrison Ford's broken leg into the script, have him carry it around on Chewbacca's back.
Well,
like C-3PO in Empire.
What, and magically just start making Chewbacca say Hodor a couple of times. Cash in on a completely different franchise.
If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, that isn't very funny, but if you have, it's bang on the money. So Phil will have a clue what you're talking about, Ed.
Can I just say, just a complete random aside, for those of you on Twitter, Hodor clock is just, it does exactly what it says on the tin, and it's a magnificent Twitter feed. Oh dear. We were doing quite well there. We'd been amazingly on message for an impressive 41 odd minutes.
Right, so getting back to Star Wars, Steve, you're quite up on this. You think it's going to be successful. I've got to say, I'm not convinced. I'll go and see it, but still not going to let me...
Well, that's the thing. They've got you anyway. It's like, I'm not convinced, but I'll go and see it.
Of course I'm going to go and see it, Ed. I grew up with it. So
I know, but that means
anything that says Star Wars
in years, they could say, actually, Harrison Ford is going to be in full clown makeup, or we've decided that the Millennium Falcon is actually going to be broken and towed around by by animals for the drone. And you'll go, well, that sounds shit, but do you know what? I'll still go and watch.
It's Star Wars. It's got Harrison Ford in it. It's got Carrie Fisher and the other one.
The other one, Mark Hamill.
Poor Mark.
I knew he was. I was just joking.
It's got the old crew in it.
This is why I'm worried.
People they've cast are interesting. It's good. So far, nothing I've seen so far has made me think, oh, fuck, which was happening quite a lot during the prequels. So far,
but not before everybody had seen Episode 1.
No,
there was no leaks, so everybody.
I wasn't too.
I couldn't care less after. I couldn't care less after Episode 1. I couldn't care less then. It could, that was as low as it could get. I was so deflated after that, and this is my issue here. I've got high hopes for 7. I don't want to have high hopes for 7 because I don't want to be let down again. You've alluded to it already tonight, Steve. You're a guy in your 40s crying. It's not a pretty sight.
I saw the trailer for Mrs. Brown's Boys again before one of the films. It's like, oh God, this looks bad.
Yeah, but you're going to have to go and see it.
Yeah, when does it open? No, actually, no, I won't, because it opens while we're not doing the podcasts.
No, I demand.
It opens on Friday, and we're recording one more podcast before the summer holidays.
On Friday, does it?
I think it does. Yeah, I think it's Friday. I think I seen a thing today where it said it was 4 days to go.
I'm not getting out of this.
So you're not getting
4
out of
days before the end of the world.
Right, what else have we got movies wise? Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, the most expensive movie of all time. Have they just come out with this, Steve?
It was always expensive. Everyone knew that, but obviously someone's just started to work out the numbers a bit, and because it was a bit tricky to work out initially, because the budgets for they combined the budgets of what was it called, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, but having worked out how much they spent on each of those two films, they spent a staggering $342 million on At World's End, and that's not including print and advertising. That's just the bottom line negative cost, which is, when you think about it, a ridiculous amount of money spent on the movie. It just tops Cleopatra, which was the previous record holder, which at the time cost $44 million, but that was in 1960. So in today's money, that's like $340 million. And you got to think, like, Cleopatra was for years and years was the most expensive film of all time, but we're not counting. There is one exception to that, which is the Russian film version of War and Peace, which the amount of money spent on that is debatable, but it was a shed load apparently. But no one's quite sure, because obviously it was shot during the days of the Soviet era, so it was a lot of money involving most of the Red Army. I think they probably could have invaded Russia when that film was being shot. There was no one defending anyone. They were all filming this bloody film. Because if you've seen the battle scenes like Borodino in that film, I'm not joking. There's, it's one of those films where there's no CGI and you see hundreds of thousands of people on these fields, and you're thinking, bloody hell, that looks impressive. But not counting that one, Cleopatra was the most expensive film by miles for a long time. But now, 300 million on a movie is not unusual. I know we talked about this a few months ago, that the accounts for the Hobbit production were had to be lodged in New Zealand annually, and at that point, and this was the end of last year, they'd already spent over 550 million at that point on the Hobbit movie. So I mean, we're looking at probably what, 700, so $750 million on the three movies.
I think you'll hit $1 billion by the time.
I'm not counting in that. By the way, that doesn't include us again. That doesn't include prints or advertising costs, which can be as much as the same amount again. So you're looking at apparently Warner Brothers are actually making very much money on the Hobbit films because they're costing so much money. Cameron's talking about making 3 Avatar movies for $1 billion budget.
Yeah, but you see, if the studios are that silly to be given that type of money out, then if it fails, then they've only got themselves to blame. And I know we've been saying this for a while, but there has to be an implosion. It has to implode at some point, and it has to try and right itself. Just like any economy does, now and again you get boom and bust where it has to right itself. We're getting to the stage now where the budgets are just so. I mean, you're talking about 500 million there. I can't put that into terms that I understand. You know what I mean? It's
times what, 500.
The original price.
You know what I mean.
The original price of a B-2 stealth bomber.
Yeah.
The most expensive aircraft ever made. Is $532 million a unit. So you can either have a tatty film involving Johnny Depp, and then 2 tatty films involving Johnny Depp, or you can have one of the most sophisticated and complicated weapon systems ever made.
Yeah, it's the way that people say, "Oh, it costs 500 million." When you actually stop and think about just how much money that is.
No. I'm only getting started. Do you want to then, I say we've given you the £532 million dollar point there. £532 million, when they actually spent that on the stealth bomber, it would have been cheaper to have it made out of solid gold in a 1-to-1 scale. So now we're starting to play about with some proper numbers. A solid gold stealth bomber or Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides.
I guess just for those that are interested, I can give you, this is the list, the top 10 most expensive films of all time adjusted for inflation. So number 1, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, $342 million. Cleopatra, $340 million. Titanic, $294 million. Spider-Man 3, $294 million. Tangled, $282 million. That was so expensive because it was like a 10-year production period on that film. I think they made the film about 3 times and kept changing their minds. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, $275 million. Waterworld, $271 million. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, $263 million. Avatar, 261, and at number 10, The Hobbit, or the first film of The Hobbit, 257 million. So on that basis, then we are looking at $750 million on the Hobbit movies.
I don't want to get all preachy and all the rest of it, but when you start looking at those types of figures, and then you start for some entertainment, and some would argue that there's not a lot of entertainment in some of the films that you've mentioned on that list.
I'd rather watch Mad Max, which costs $400,000.
Yeah, but when you're talking about that type of money, and then you see the issues in the world that some countries people don't even eat for a week. It's just perverse sometimes when you're looking at these figures. Something has to happen. It has to implode. It has to right itself in some way.
Well, I mean, I'll be curious to see. I mean, Titanic and Cleopatra as examples. I mean, Cleopatra at number 2. I mean, that was a film where they built half of Rome, right? In Rome, gigantic sets. You can at least see where the money went. It was notorious at the time for over expense. It was the only major production at 20th Century Fox at the time, and so every other production was billing Cleopatra. So the budget was inflated for various reasons, but and that was a notorious example. Not the norm. Definitely not even close. That was a total outlier, a very unusual film where the budget spiraled out of control. It was the biggest expensive film of all time for years and years and years. Titanic was the most expensive film of all time when it came out. Again, they built ship, didn't they? Or at least half of it. They built a whole studio complex in order to film it. There was a lot of reasons why that was so expensive. But when you're starting to see things like Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince costing $275 million, and that's not an unusual thing, you think, where the hell is all the money going?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
they're not paying the actors. I mean, they're a bunch of kids. So why is that costing $200? I mean, and you start thinking, well, so is that all effects? Is that the effects budget?
Well, it can't be the effects budget because all the effects houses are getting screwed, and they're all going out of business. So,
to be fair, but there's a secondary to that is that at the moment we don't actually know what the market price, including profit and sustainability, for some of these effects actually is, because the companies just underbid each other to the point of suicidal. And also their contracts are appalling. Nobody seems able to write a decent contract where they're not liable for people changing their mind halfway through and they're expected to cover all the costs. So the honest answer to that is we don't know how much a fully effects laden film is actually supposed to cost when the people get to keep their jobs at the end of it.
Mark, from a games point of view, how big are the budgets there? Because I was reading something that not that long ago that was saying that the games industry actually brings in more profit than the movie industry does.
Wait there while I run to Mr. Google.
Well, I know the last.
I'm trying to remember.
100 million was it to make something like that?
I'm trying to remember what the Grand Theft Auto 5 budget was.
Grand Theft Auto 5, yeah.
Development and marketing budget of £170 million.
See, that's marketing as well, though. You see, that's not just development. But these are just but these budgets for these films. That's not even including the marketing costs, which will be twice the same again, effectively. Yeah,
exactly. And if you consider the amount of years that a game is in development for as well, that can easily be kind of 5-6 years. Some can be a decade or something in the making from the initial concept. But again, they bring in huge amounts. But the thing that films have over them, perhaps, though, games do have this kind of immediacy, and there is, the kind of tagline of bigger than Hollywood. However, in terms of the amount of money that they make over their lifetimes, it's pretty much a kind of punchy, people buy them at the time, and in a couple of years, they're out of date. Whereas, films continue to appear on different formats for decades afterwards.
True. It's got more ancillary revenue streams, hasn't it? I suppose.
So what you're saying, Mark, is that in terms of entertainment, actually, investing in games development is actually cheaper, more cost effective, and likely to turn a profit than movies.
Are we investing your money here or mine?
Your money.
Mine, I'm putting them in neither. The amount of games, if you consider the amount of games that actually turn out to be a success, if you consider the kind of the amount of kind of talent going towards mobile gaming and that kind of thing, and the proliferation of free to play, and just the kind of race to the bottom of who can offer you know, a little amount for absolutely nothing initial cost, then, you know, there's not much money to be made there. However, there will be exceptions which make absolutely, you know, billions.
Yeah. Okay. So let's flip this around and send it in Simon's direction. 39 years ago, Simon,
Yes.
a certain film was released, which became it is now acknowledged to be the first ever blockbuster, summer blockbuster.
Yep.
In movie history. So was that film, and we're talking about Jaws, responsible for the mess we find ourselves in now?
He lay the blame fairly and squarely at the feet of Stephen. What's his name?
Spielberg.
Spielberg. Yeah, that's terribly. Our brain went. Spielberg.
Sorry. What's your job again?
Yeah, I know. It's only funny how the brain went. I was gonna say Stroberger. I thought Stroberger. That's not even a name. He's never called Stroberger.
He's having a stroke.
That's what it is.
I've seen the advert.
Fast. Face, arms.
Spielberg.
Time, isn't it?
I don't know. I think there was a lot of things happened at that time, wasn't it? A lot of elements all came together to create what turned out to be the blockbuster. And then of course it was followed up with, you know, things like Star Wars and E.T. and all the everything ever since. But I guess it was they started throwing bigger and bigger budgets at these films to make bigger and bigger spectacles. But I mean that did. I mean, as Steve was alluded to earlier, it was that happened much earlier in film history time. In the 60s, it was happening then, and it sort of had a boom bust, and you had the proliferation of the 70 indies films, which again built up to Jaws, Star Wars, and the rest of them. So it just seems to be going on and on and on and on. And you're absolutely right. Although you did say this last year about the bubble's going to burst, because you did say it about superhero films, but they're still going, aren't they?
Yeah, but we haven't
going.
We haven't had the what is it, Spider-Man versus Batman? We haven't had that yet. Is it that one, or is it Superman?
Superman and Batman.
I knew it was
well, that's what he was saying, that they looked like next year there was going to be a real, you know, yeah, basically there was so many big budget, major blockbuster films coming out in a space of probably July of next year. But what's happened is a lot of them have been moved. So, for example, Superman versus Batman.
I see, it's not that easy.
Well, no, you just said it, got it in my head. Superman versus Batman has been moved to 2016. So it's not part that under the claims that Zack Snyder needs more time to do the film, to make the film and to write it and everything. But I think more to the point, they bottled it and thought, Christ, we're going to get murdered if we come out in that summer. Because to be honest, Man of Steel didn't do that well. I mean, it cost $230 million, and it just about made the budget back. So they're putting a lot of Warner Brothers in particular, I think, are spending an awful lot of money trying to create. They've had the Nolan, Batman movies, and they've done extremely well. But now they're trying to sort of shoehorn Batman back in, because Superman isn't that popular a character, really. I don't think, in terms of budget, in terms of box office, as opposed to Batman.
The problem, it's a great character for a comic book, but when you try to, and it's failed in the past, where you try to bring it to the big screen, if you've got this guy who is almost invincible, then the alter ego, the bad guy, has to be so over the top that you lose all credibility. So even trying to set it in some kind of movie reality or reality world, it doesn't really work with that character, I don't think, because he's invincible.
Superman's definitely a difficult character to turn into a movie, because first of all, he's got that kind of Dudley Do-Right, truth, justice, American way kind of a persona, which is always a bit old-fashioned now. He's invincible, effectively, or pretty much, which means it's difficult to put him in jeopardy and in peril. It can be done. I mean, Captain America was a very patriotic character from the Second World War originally, and transferring him to the modern age was tricky. And certainly they did the first movie, they set it during World War II. It worked in the Avengers because he was part of a group. The sequel, Winter Soldier, worked because they kind of took that whole thing and turned it on its head. They turned it into a sort of 70s conspiracy thriller, and that was a clever idea, because it made him more acceptable to a modern audience than he would have been if he'd just been the classic sort of patriotic Dudley Do-Right character that he was in the original comics. So you can do it if you're prepared to take a risk. The problem is, a lot of studios aren't prepared to take. I think Marvel have taken some pretty big risks and they've paid off. And looking at what they've got lined up in the next few years, there's some interesting stuff coming, and they are still taking risks. I don't think Warner Brothers have been. All I can say is that sitting in the cinema watching Belle, which was a low budget, like £5 million movie, about real people and real things, it was such a nice to sit through a film.
18th century. How many people are going to be interested in that, Steve?
But there were no giant robots monsters. It was such
and nobody interested in it.
Change. Unfortunately, people don't go and see it, and I wish they would. Honestly, film of the week. Don't knock all the rest of that rubbish on the head. Go and see Belle. It's a lovely little movie about something genuinely real. And
unfortunately, Steve, films are so subjective that trying to get people in and writing a review, it's the most difficult thing you can do is for a movie, is write a review, because it's such a subjective thing. And people
mostly, although there were definitely times when it's a total piece of shit. There's no other way around it. I think we can all put our hands firmly up our asses and say that Ride Along was crap.
An interesting thing, and I found this out today. It's been an entire year has passed, because I always buy my Blu-rays from Amazon. I haven't bought anything from Amazon in a year, so I haven't bought any Blu-rays in a year.
No, is that's not because you're boycotting Amazon?
No, it's not because I'm boycotting Amazon, and a lot of it last year with the new site and all the rest of it. A lot of time was taken up by that. But since Christmas, I've watched about 2 movies, and I haven't bought anything. And Steve, you gave me Captain Phillips to watch.
Yeah, the one film you watched, I gave you. I think I've watched since Christmas. I've watched probably 300 movies.
Yeah, but you do go to the cinema and watch 4 in a go. And only take a break to have a curry. But what about? Simon. Obviously, you get the stuff through for review. But when did you actually go out and buy a disc?
When did I go out and buy a disc? I'll tell you, the last disc I bought was True Detective, because I'd never heard of it, and you said,
"Oh yeah,
mate, this is really good."
And what did you think?
I've watched the first 2 episodes, and it's building up to be something bloody damn spectacular.
Yeah, totally.
It looks and sounds incredible. So hurry up with this podcast, because I want to go and watch the rest of it.
No, I just thought it was interesting. And I have watched movies, but they've been streamed. What does that say? Ed, I know you buy records, but when was the last time you bought a movie?
When did Rush come out?
Oh, wow.
About 6 months ago.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay. And have you streamed stuff since then?
Very much so, yes. And the Sky on Demand movies thing as well. Same. Just to quantify, it's not just the N word. There are other means that I'm getting.
Other streaming services are available.
But
no TV. It begins with an N.
By comparison, I think I've bought 62 records this year. I think it's either 62 or 63. I haven't worked it out.
That's a lot of money.
The last one of those arrived on Friday.
That is a lot of money, Ed. A lot of money.
Yeah, but the difference is that I have far more satisfaction of ownership from them.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not having a go at you for spending your money on that.
No. But
your
equally,
passion.
there is on a cynical level, Phil. If I needed to get shot of them, the Blu-rays are worth buttons. The records, you get pretty much back what you paid for.
That is very true, Ed. That is, I was pretty shocked at how little you get for a Blu-ray nowadays.
And one of the records I bought some years ago on eBay for £11.82. It turns out it's one of only 75 on the planet, and a one in a very similar number point went for several £100 the other day. And I'm thinking about basically just. That will cover most of my purchases this year if I let you.
Or another jacket.
Or barbecue.
Or your barbecue.
Or my barbecue. Yeah, one or the other.
Or a new jacket.
Well, no, you see the jacket. You keep bringing back the jacket. The jacket is going to start literally. Obviously, we had the longest day over the weekend.
Yeah, the nights are drawing in now.
Game of Thrones mode. Winter is coming.
It is.
It's going to be back and ready to go. And it will be for the next. Well, I reckon I'll die before it does. It's indestructible. Year one purchase, very steep, but as the decades roll on, brilliant. Not a problem. Bargain.
Mr. Botwright, Where do you stand, buying discs or streaming? What's been your movie preference last year?
I haven't bought a Blu-ray yet, probably for about a year, maybe even kind of 18 months.
Okay, that's a long time.
It is. Well, once I bought the complete Lone Wolf and Cub collection, I felt it can't get any better than that. So go out on a high.
Well, I had 4 arrive today, so...
Yeah, but you see, I think the other thing that's kind of put me off is I've got a huge pile to watch. Every time I walk in the cinema room, this thing's taller than I am, this pile. So it's maybe subconsciously I'm saying, look, get them watched before you buy any more tap. But having said that, I've been streaming quite a bit, and could be the way of the future.
It's the lazy man's option, streaming.
I think it might be the future, Steve.
I've watched about 20 movies on Netflix recently. And what they are basically are films that, like, for example, Luc Besson's The Family. Stuff that I didn't get around to seeing at the cinema, don't want to waste 20 quid on buying on Blu-ray, but would happily watch, for an hour and a half, 2 hours on Netflix on a quiet evening or a Sunday afternoon. And I've watched about 20 movies in the last, say, month. Just catching up on stuff on Netflix that I hadn't seen.
Steve, the sun's been out. Why have you been sitting inside?
I was only out in the last week. Previous to that, it was a bit rubbish.
Yeah, you could have come over and emptied my shed.
There is an offer you can't refuse. Oh, that'd be a fun weekend, wouldn't it?
Emptying my shed?
Ed's shed. Well, it's not you.
Ed's shed, baby. Ed's shed. Actually, do you know what? I was terrified during it. I was just going to... At one stage, it smelt really bad in there about a year and a half ago, and I was just worried I was going to encounter like a cat skeleton or something, but thankfully that didn't come to pass. That was good.
They were just spiders the size of your fist.
Only 1 or 2 of them. I mean, they'd been busy and obviously clearing out in knowledge that, the shed's about to go. But yeah, as I was saying before the podcast kicked off, they'd been industrious enough to actually stick a gardening glove to the wall with webs. It was like a horror prop. It was absolutely magnificent. Kudos to them for that. So, good.
What were they trying to catch?
I don't know. I can't.
You?
I wish Botwright would say more. He's definitely the funniest person on this podcast.
He's still sober, at least as far as I know.
Well, that's easy. He doesn't say anything for half an hour, thinking of one-liners, whilst the rest of us are doing all the talking.
Is that where it is, Steve?
Yeah.
It's not that you love the sound of your own voice.
Botwright on the podcast, there wouldn't be much, we'd be 5 minutes long. Be a lot of singers in there, but not much content.
All killer, no filler.
And you just proved the point. That wraps up the podcast for this week. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Anyone can cook aloo gobi, but can you bend the ball like Beckham?
Mark Botwright.
George Michael is still a superstar, and you still listen to Wham.
Simon Crust.
Jess, it's Bex.
And Ed Selley.
Lesbian. Her birthday's in March. I thought she was a Pisces.
Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark avforums.com for the latest reviews, news and video. Plus, why not leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.